Dumelang Abshin Nda. Namhlanje ngikhuluma ngokudla kwesintu, something that is very close to my heart. You would know if you are somebody that follows me on social media or has seen some of the things I do online. You will remember that I am very much into my indigenous foods. I'm very much into indigenous knowledges. And I want to make a confession. The reason why I am making this solo podcast, which is going to be threefold, by the way. One, it is because I've been asked to talk about indigenous foods by my very good friends on Instagram and people that listen to what is now Beyond the Headlines with Dr. Q. The second reason is because I was driving and listening to a podcast as I came home from work. And I was listening to a podcast titled Visions and Tones by a very good friend of mine, Tony Nyundu, who is based in Australia. And in this particular episode, he had Rugare Gomo, who is of Zimbabwean origin. And what I particularly liked about that episode was that Rugare was telling his story in the most authentic way I could ever imagine. You know, the way he owns the story, the way that he tells it, it was so inspiring to a point that I was like, Q, why aren't you responding to the people? They are asking, can you talk about indigenous foods? And so the reason why I thought it should be threefold is because I don't want these episodes to be long. I want them to be very short for starters. And secondly, I want to talk about what it is that pushed me into looking at indigenous foods in particular. African indigenous foods or indigenous foods that are common from the spaces where I found myself. So the story doesn't begin with me, by the way. It begins with a very old woman, Umam Jadu, my great-grandmother. She passed in 2019. But in all her... how old was she? I think she was 92. Ever since I've known that woman, she's been working the soil. And in her working the soil, she's not just producing any foods. No. If you're thinking spinach, if you're thinking cabbage, onions, or whatever else that we use, no, I'm not talking about cash crops here. She used to cultivate indigenous foods or foods that have now been indigenized. If you go to the Department of Agriculture's website and you look for indigenous foods, you will see that there's foods that are originally South African, there's foods that are originally African, and there are foods that have been brought from the Western world but have adapted to our growing conditions, our traditional farming methods, and have thus been classified as indigenized crops. So when I talk about indigenous crops in this context, I include all those. So there's one in particular that I am known for and I laugh all the time. When people just see me talking about food and indigenous foods, or when we are eating at a restaurant, they'd be like, hey Q, so Pamadumbe. Where are amadumbe? So amadumbe, for those of you that don't know, it is taro. I know a lot of people confuse taro with yams. It's not yams. So in the other parts of Africa, they are referred to as cocoa yams. Those are amadumbe. So ugogo, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, would eat, at least for the rest of her life, her entire life, she ate indigenous foods. She ate amadumbe. She ate sweet potatoes. And I'm not talking about what you find at Woolies or Spar or all these supermarkets. I'm talking about the real deal here, you know? Sweet potatoes in the truest sense. And the way that she bonded with her food was so amazing. You know, I'm not even going to talk about the preparation because it was just simple. She would harvest these, put them in a pot, water, salt, and that was it. There was nothing added to it. And it wasn't because she was sick or anything. for the most part, she wasn't. She was a very healthy woman. She was able to walk about 2 kilometers. She would walk from home to church and church to home. That was never a problem. She spoke beautifully. Her skin, Jesus Christ. If you guys were to see her skin, and when we engaged her and Simbus are asking, how come you've got such flawless skin? And I know most of you are gonna say this is cliche or a lie, doesn't matter. But her response, in fact, to many things, she would say, if you want to live long, pray and mind what you eat. And she would make reference to indigenous foods. And then she would make reference to how she prepared her food. You know, if her food had spice, if the food had spice, she would not eat that because she knew it wasn't good for her. She would rather opt for eating isijingi. Now, isijingi is pumpkin porridge. Pumpkin porridge. I think I should just keep it like that. If you know umdogwe or mealy porridge, it's that but with pumpkin. So she would make that and eat it. I eat it to this day, and I'm so grateful because she passed the preparation method to me, and I still boast to this day. Among my family members, nobody makes isijingi better than I do. So when I was still a teenager, ugogo would go to, okay, ngesizulu, I should be saying ugudu, but we don't have those terms from where I come. But ukuluwami, my great grandmother, would go to the fields to cultivate the land, to harvest these crops, and I would always be her companion whenever I was visiting, that is, and that happened quite frequently. And you know, it was a combination of the stories that she told. It was how she would talk about uh, certain values, such as being respectful, such as being humble, such as working hard as a young man. And I remember she liked quoting the book of Proverbs, Isaka. Uh, there's that scripture that talks about going to an end, you with an idle hand, or you with idle hands. I first heard that scripture from my great grandmother, and we were out in the fields next to a beautiful river called Estunwane, and it was hot, scorching hot. Jesus, yo, God, I don't even know how to frame this conversation because I'm just reminded of so many things that happened back then and all the teachings that were associated with the practice of going ensimini, our fields, with my great grandma. I think what then led me to looking into indigenous foods. Um, it was way before I did research, actually. It was in 2013 when I started my diploma. And I remember the first time I went back home, I laid a complaint saying that, Gogo, they don't even have amadumbe. It's so hard to find upadada. Now, getting sweet potatoes wasn't as easy in a busy city like Durban, where I was studying at the time. And mind you, I lived in Umlazi because that is where I did my first year. And if you're a first year, you didn't stay in town, you would stay in on campus. So I had better chances of getting amadumbe and upadada if ngise town, but I wasn't there. But also, whenever I went to town and looked for those, there was none. Fine. Get home, I complain, there aren't amadumbe, there isn't upadada, and. I was frustrated. For 3 full years, I was seriously frustrated. I then went to do my Bachelor of Technology at the Tshwane University of Technology. By the way, I love those two institutions, Mangosuthu University and Tshwane University of Technology. There's something that they did to me, but I'll share that someday. So when I got to Tshwane, I was doing research methodology in addition to everything else I was doing. And I remember we were asked to come up with a proposal in preparation for our MTechs or our master's programs. And I wrote this beautiful piece, I still have it to this day. I wrote this beautiful piece on indigenous crops. And I wrote that because it was out of frustration when Professor Wim van der Verbeeke said to us, I need you to use all the theoretical knowledge that I've given you and come up with a proposal. I saw that as an opportunity to solve this problem. Why don't we have indigenous foods in big cities? That was my main question. Not framed like that, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. Did that, and it was great. I passed very well with the distinction, and I said, you know what? I am going to use this to apply for my master's. And so that is how it all started. From there onwards, I have been immersing myself on literature that has to do with indigenous food crops. But what has been fascinating for me are the interactions I have with indigenous farmers, the interactions I am having with old grannies in rural areas, young people who, by the way, are frustrated because, oh, go, their grandmothers haven't taught them how to work the soil, how to work the land, how to produce food for themselves, not just indigenous crops, but food in general. But in particular, because I'm biased, they haven't taught them how to grow ukudla kwesintu or emphasized the need to cultivate and consume ukudla kwesintu. I saw this when I was doing my PhD. I had two focus groups that included young people, and they were so frustrated. My goodness. You know, those of you that are in the food discourse, there's something that we like saying, and I hope it would stop. I wish it would stop. We like saying that young people see agriculture as a backward thing. Yes, there is a bit of stigma, but I don't think they see it as a backward thing. I just think we now grow up in a society where the older generation likes saying, we understand farming is not easy and tending the fields isn't a child's play. I come from a family that farms, but I see with the now generation, that is what they say. In fact, I would say even with myself, they had started being soft on me. But my aunts and my uncles, their daily bread was going to the fields. They would be working those sugarcane plantations, they would be working those timber plantations, and they would be producing our cash crops or our medium term crops every single term. They would be working the soil. So young people confessed then during the course of my PhD, saying that, it's so sad that COVID has taken Ukoko. And what is even more concerning for us or disturbing for us is the fact that Ukoko is a person who was cultivating the land quite frequently. In fact, it was a daily bread. But she never saw a need to teach us how to work the soil, how to grow amadumbe. We don't even know how to grow amadumbe ourselves. Do they grow from stem? Do they grow from roots? Whenever she went to the gardens, whenever she went to the fields, she would tell us, stay home, make sure that nobody comes in the house, gets in the house, make tea for me at this hour, and. And so Yeah, that is how I think young people are being robbed, but that is not where I am. I'm going to expand on that in the upcoming episodes. So, Umamjadu, going back where I started, is the reason why I fell in love with Ukudla Kwesintu. I would say my grandparents, which are Mamjadu's daughters, they all love ukudla kwesintu. They love their indigenous foods, and I think they carried the legacy from their mother. So they too cultivate. They produce ukudla kwesintu, and I'm gonna make reference to my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother. To this day, she grows amadumbe, she grows sweet potatoes, she grows bambara groundnuts and other indigenous crops. When I go home, I know I'm likely to have amaranth, I'm likely to have your cucurbits or cucurbits, however you pronounce it, in Dang. And it's them that instilled this thing of ukudla kwesintu to me, and I am super grateful. But I always like referencing Umamjadu because she is Indala Bantu, the mother of all generations that we see now, at least in my maternal side of the family. And so, yes, that is how the story begins. That is where, rather, it begins. It starts with Umam Jatu, an old woman who was well known for her love for farming, and in particular for farming ukudla kwesintu, indigenous foods.